Right, this is absolutely extraordinary. Rachel Reeves has just delivered her second catastrophic budget, and now she is reportedly considering her own resignation. Why? Because she has been caught red-handed, breaking a manifesto promise that she absolutely unequivocally swore to the British people. She promised not to raise taxes on working people. She promised. And now, after two budgets that have raised taxes to historic levels, after imposing £30 billion of new levies, after freezing income tax thresholds and pushing 700,000 additional people into paying income tax, the Institute for Fiscal Studies has delivered a damning verdict. Rachel Reeves has lied, and now she cannot even defend her own decisions. Stay with British royal family because this political implosion is spectacular. Quick favour. If you are already gripped by this governmental catastrophe, smash that subscribe button right now. Over 92% of you have not yet. It is completely free, takes 1 second, and genuinely means everything to us. Cheers if you did. Right, let us talk about why a Chancellor would consider resigning. Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative leader, has absolutely torn into Rachel Reeves with a response that was described as barnstorming. She accused the Chancellor of being spineless, shameless and completely aimless. Not just wrong, not just misguided, spineless, shameless, aimless. Those are character assassinations. Those are words that suggest a Chancellor who has completely lost control of her own government and her own moral compass. Badenoch wrote in the Daily Express, "Taxes raised on working people to pay for welfare handouts." That is the summary of this budget. That is the entire story in one sentence. And she is absolutely correct. This budget raises taxes on working people who already pay the highest tax burden since the Second World War. And where does that money go? Into benefits, into welfare, into handouts. It is redistribution dressed up as fiscal responsibility. Badenoch continued, "The whole story of this week's budget can be summed up in one sentence. Taxes raised on working people to pay for welfare handouts. It was a smorgasbord of new taxes that, when taken together with her budget last year, means Rachel Reeves has raised the tax burden to the highest on record. There can be no doubt in anyone's mind that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have now broken their manifesto commitment not to raise taxes on working people. That is the nuclear accusation. That is saying they lied to the British people. And here is where it gets truly devastating. The Institute for Fiscal Studies, the leading think tank in Britain, has delivered a damning verdict that essentially confirms that accusation. According to the IFS, basic rate taxpayers will pay £220 more per year. Higher rate taxpayers will pay £600 more per year. £220, £600. That is not negligible. That is real money that real people will miss in their bank accounts every single year. Director Helen Miller of the IFS said something absolutely cutting. Rachel Reeves said she wouldn't come back for more. She clearly did. She said she would not impose additional taxes. She lied. She came back for more. And now the entire country is paying the price. But it gets worse. The Chancellor has frozen income tax thresholds for an additional 3 years. That means as inflation rises, people earn more in nominal terms, but their tax thresholds stay the same. So they get dragged into higher tax bands without actually earning any more real money. It is the ultimate stealth tax, and according to the IFS, it will push 700,000 additional people on low incomes into paying income tax by 2031. 700,000 people who currently do not pay income tax will have to start paying it because Rachel Reeves froze the thresholds. On top of that, 1 million people on above average incomes will find themselves paying the higher rate due to the change. By 2029, more than a quarter of all taxpayers are expected to be higher or additional rate taxpayers. That is extraordinary. Or that is fundamentally changing the tax system. That is the opposite of what Reeves promised. And Helen Miller warned something absolutely crucial. She said that by introducing this stealth increase rather than simply putting up the tax rate, Reeves cannot be sure how much money will come in. The sum depends entirely on future inflation rates. So the government has created a mechanism that could generate vastly more or vastly less revenue than expected, depending on economic circumstances completely beyond the government's control. That is not fiscal responsibility. That is fiscal recklessness. And the threshold freezes also mean higher national insurance bills. Some working people will pay additional national insurance thanks to changes to salary sacrifice pension schemes. Despite Labour's general election promise not to increase national insurance, income tax or VAT, despite that explicit promise, Reeves has done exactly that. She has increased national insurance. She has broken her word. Helen Miller called it precisely what it is. I would call that a breach of the manifesto. Not a misunderstanding, not a difficult choice, a breach, a violation, a lie. Shadow Chancellor Sir Mel Stride hit out at the fiscal statement as well, saying it was just all the wrong choices. Putting up taxes on hardworking people with this extension of the income tax threshold freeze, which is something that she basically said she wouldn't do. He is right. She said she would not freeze thresholds. She did. She lied. Stride continued, and quite a lot of the spending, of course. It is just going into the welfare budget. So more on benefits. I think they are the wrong choices. I think what she should have done is to concentrate on getting government spending down to allow both herself to bear down on the debt a bit, but equally to cut taxes to get the economy growing. He is describing the opposite of what Reeves has done. She has not cut spending. She has not cut taxes. She has raised taxes and spent the money on welfare. Now, here is what reveals the true crisis. The IFS praised the Chancellor's decision to increase her headroom from 10 billion to 22 billion pounds. That sounds good, right? But what does it actually mean? It means she has given herself more buffer in case the economy goes wrong, in case something unexpected happens, in case her tax predictions turn out to be wildly inaccurate. But why would a Chancellor need that kind of buffer? Why would a Chancellor need £22 billion of headroom if her policies were working? If her economic predictions were sound? If her budget was well constructed? You only need that kind of buffer if you know your plan is fragile. If you know your projections might be wrong. If you know something could go catastrophically wrong. And the IFS warned something absolutely devastating. Reeves's plan to balance the books depends on a vague promise to cut planned government spending in the run-up to a general election, which may prove politically impossible. In other words, she is making promises about future spending cuts that she almost certainly cannot keep. She is saying, trust me, I will cut spending later, but later is an election year. Later is when any government will cut spending rather than try to save money. So her entire fiscal plan is built on a promise she almost certainly will not be able to keep. Helen Miller said it perfectly. Perhaps the government really will be able to find new efficiency savings, or maybe when the time comes, and as the election looms, it will find that the spending plans are unrealistically low. Translation, she does not believe the government will cut spending. She thinks the government has set unrealistically low spending plans that will have to be abandoned when election time arrives. Reeves is now planning to increase spending by just 0.5% per year in real terms in both 2028 and 2029, down from her previous planned increase of 1% per year. That is razor thin. That is basically no real increase at all when you account for inflation and population growth. And the IFS is saying that plan is unrealistic. That plan will not survive contact with political reality. The think tank also warned that average disposable incomes will only grow by about 0.5% per year up to the next election. That is described as truly dismal compared to the more than 2% annual growth from the mid-1980s to mid-2000s. In other words, the British people are going to experience one of the worst periods of income growth in generations. All whilst paying historically high taxes. all whilst the government is raising taxes even higher. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has tried to defend the budget by pointing to the ending of the two-child limit on universal credit. He said he is not going to apologise for lifting 500,000 children out of poverty. But that is the problem. That is where the money is going, into welfare, into benefits, into handouts, not into growing the economy, not into creating jobs, not into making Britain more competitive, into welfare. So now we have Rachel Reeves trapped in an impossible situation. She has broken her manifesto promises. She has raised taxes to historic levels. She has implemented stealth taxes that will catch millions of people off guard. She has created a fiscal plan that the IFS says is built on unrealistic assumptions. She has promised spending cuts she almost certainly cannot deliver, and now she is reportedly considering resignation. That is the only honourable course of action. A chancellor who has broken her word to the British people, who has implemented policies the opposite of what she promised, who has created economic hardship for millions, should resign. That is what integrity looks like. That is what taking responsibility looks like. Whether she will actually do it remains to be seen, but the fact that she is considering it suggests even Rachel Reeves understands how catastrophic her decisions have been. Even Rachel Reeves understands that she has failed. Even Rachel Reeves understands that her promises meant nothing and her policies have made things worse. Thanks so much for watching. See you in the next one.